So basically what I do is I study worship in Aquinas's Summa, and I think religio for Aquinas can be translated as worship. And so I take most of my analysis of worship from Aquinas' description of religio. What I think is that creates a little bit of a puzzle, because religio is indeed a very important virtue for Aquinas, but it's annexed to justice, because it's like what we offer to God, because we sort of are in debt with God for having created us. And so basically I think that whole language and that whole explanation creates a sort of puzzle, given that obviously worship is very important, but for Aquinas love is very important as well. And obviously love, or caritas, is like the most important of all the virtues. So what I try to do is like put these two things together, which at first glance don't think to fit too well together, because on the one hand you have like infinite distinction between the human person and God, and that's the ground for worship basically, and on the other hand you have like the union with God that is desired. So basically what I do is like I explore union with God in terms of love with God. And for Aquinas, when it's like what is love, he says friendship. Obviously it's not friendship as we take it today, like the lads, you know what I mean? Like it's
watching football together.
Exactly. It can extend to parents, extends to like wife, husband, extends to obviously friends, but also like sisters, brothers, younger, older, every type of friend, of relationship that it's loving, and it's basically every type of relationship that desires the good of the beloved and desires union with the beloved. So basically, how do we fit these things together? How do we like understand this sort of puzzle? What I think is that joint attention is a very good metaphor to understand how these two things work together. Because if you model worship in the light of joint attention, you will have that God can be that object, that it's quite distant from us because of God's excellences and God's majesty. But at the same time, if God would be by our side, which is the name that at least in the Catholic Church is given to the Holy Spirit, if God can be like someone who's also by our side, and not only that like distant thing at the end, then like the union we will have with God can be somehow expressed in a personal way in the act of worship, if God is by our side, and if we could like align to God's view towards God, basically. You would say God is at the end of the process of a religious life. And so you do things, including worship, in order to be united with God. But God to be at our side means that God also helps us in that process in ways in which we don't just do it by ourselves. So it would be like sort of, it's not just me, like a sort of like acquired or like practicing these acts of worship, but it's like God by our side and like sort of trying us to align with him in the way like we should look at him basically in worship or paying honor.